Hi everyone. My name is Mason Warren.
And my name is Joy Lee, and we are two of three iSTEM student liaisons. Thank you for attending the second lightning talk titled Innovations in Clean Technology and Sustainability. As a reminder, this event is being recorded, so if you do not want to appear in this recording, please turn off your camera. And today we have four amazing speakers. Two of our panelists are current Seaver faculty, and the other two are panelists from our LMU alumni.
So first we have Dr. Emily Jarvis, Associate Professor of Chemistry and Biochemistry. Next we have Grace Johnson, a PhD candidate in theoretical chemistry at Stanford University. Grace obtained a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from LMU in 2017. Our third speaker is Dr. Emin Isakanian, Associate Professor of Mechanical Engineering. Our last speaker is Dr. Dre Helms, a postdoctoral researcher at the Berkeley Lab. Dre obtained a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from LMU in 2015 and recently achieved a PhD in mechanical engineering from UC Berkeley in 2019. And first off, we have Dr. Emily Jarvis.
All right. I'm up and it's telling me I'm unmuted. Hopefully you can hear me. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. So right before I get started into my specific information I wanted to share with you tonight, I wanted to welcome you and kind of get everyone going a little bit with some questions so that we're interactive here. And hopefully you've had a chance in your classes to maybe try some of these different ways of responding. This may or may not be as fun as a Kahoot, a quiz, because we're not in competition here. But I was just curious, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you see these words, these concepts of clean technology, sustainability? What comes to mind for you? The reason this isn't a Kahoot is we've got a couple questions here. All of them have no specific right answer, but I'm just curious to kind of get your feedback there. So go ahead, go to pollev.com/EmilyJarvis888. Maybe I'll test it, see if it's working here.
If you want, I can read out some of the things that are coming in the chat.
Oh, are they? Oh, there now it's coming up. It was just going kind of slow. Okay. Okay, a few things are coming up. Probably more will be there. I'll get to look at them afterwards, but we may or may not see them all here. So that's interesting. Cars, eco-sustainability, hybrid. Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, some of that is things like what choices can we make as consumers come to mind when we think about clean technology, definitely. So thank you all. Oh, and I see vegan there. So what choices can we make for our bodies? Meat showing up. So thank you. Those are some great topics. They're going to keep flowing in, but here, now that you're in, we have a couple multiple choice questions as well. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the next one of what do you see as your most important role in promoting sustainability and clean tech? And of course, like I said, we couldn't do a Kahoot on this because I don't think there's one right answer here, but really kind of where do you feel most equipped to contribute? And what are some ways that you've maybe thought of? Looks like nobody's going to work in or start a company that promotes this yet, but maybe that's in it. Okay, all right, someone is. Okay, other, who knows? Be open there and see. And this looks like it got cut off a little bit, but making informed choices as a consumer definitely is seeming to be our most popular one. But hopefully we kind of inspire you a little bit with option 2 as well here, option B, doing scientific and engineering research to address some of these issues tonight. And certainly then communicating that we have a big election coming up, and just thinking about how we can really make sure that we're helping with the knowledge that we have to create informed citizens is a great way to promote that as well. All right. So last question here. Thank you all for your participation so far. What do you see as the biggest hurdles to this issue here? You know, what is holding us back from promoting and adopting sustainable and clean tech? All right, thanks. I see we have some different things here. Maybe those of you answering other, maybe you could go ahead and put that, what you're thinking, in the chat. Maybe we even come back to that later, would be great. But cost is certainly showing up as the big one here, and that has been a big issue, but that's where our answer B of doing research and innovation in science and engineering to maybe bring that cost down is something that we want to focus on tonight. So thank you all for participating in that. I want to go ahead and just jump into what I wanted to share with you very briefly tonight. Real big picture overview of a few types of research that are going on in my group right now and over the last few years with LMU students. And I've titled this Quantum Insights for Developing Renewable Energy and Green Chemistry. It's going to be real big picture overview. So if any of these pique your interest, please go ahead and email me and I'd be happy to talk with you in more detail about them. So first, we have kind of three areas I want to share with you super briefly tonight. And they're all quantum calculations that we're doing in our research that are related in some way to solar energy applications. So one is developing water oxidation catalysts. Another is looking at metal oxide nanopowder surface characterization. And the last one is looking at organic polymer design for solar and electronic applications. So you see these three pictures I have here. The first, the sun in the middle, is bringing everything together with kind of that solar energy concept umbrella. But why do I have a dinosaur on the left-hand side here? What we're wanting to think about is that, you know, a lot of what we consider fossil fuels are really a solar energy as well. They're a stored solar energy, but made over millions of years' time. We don't have the time to make that much more as we run out of those resources. And we don't want to be stuck with the thermodynamic inefficiency of burning. You know, people invented fire, or they didn't really invent it, but they mastered fire, and now it's mastering us at times, right? A long time ago. But that's an inefficient way to gain power. And so we want to look at a much more environmentally benign way that is inspired by nature, and that's photosynthesis. So let me show you some examples there, where if we looked inside these leaves, we could see at a much smaller scale some really exciting chemistry going on. And that one I want to focus on is looking at this concept of what's happening in photosystem 2 for photosynthesis. And what plants are doing all around us all the time is this chemical reaction that's really tough to do. So we should be really impressed with them. They're bringing water in and using a photocatalyst, splitting that into oxygen and protons. And they are harvesting the electrons from that process to take that down the electron transport chain in photosynthesis. What we want to do is just that chemical reaction. And there are some molecules that we can synthesize in the lab that will promote that same chemical reaction of splitting water into its components. One problem that's been historically an issue is that some of the molecules that work best in that way are based off of really rare and costly metals such as ruthenium and iridium. And what we're looking at in my group now, and I have a couple of students doing these very calculations even as we speak, looking at replacing these rare and costly metals with much more benign and earth abundant metals such as manganese and iron. Okay, another area which is going to be fun because Grace Johnson worked in this area when she was here as a student. And we've had a very productive collaboration with a group at the Russian Academy of Sciences doing some experimental characterization of nanopowders. Why are nanopowders cool? They're exciting because they're solid. They're much more robust in general solid state catalysts rather than molecular catalysts. nanopowders are better than individual crystals and that they have really high surface area. That's where the reactions take place, and they're easy to prepare. They're difficult to characterize. And that's the cool thing about this research we have going with these folks in Russia, is that they're able to do this novel application of a technique of nuclear reaction analysis, determine the chemical composition of the surfaces of these nanopowders. And then we, and most recently Grace on the 2017 paper there, are able to go ahead and characterize some of the quantum chemistry of what's the consequence of that surface structure. What is that doing in terms of reactivity of these surfaces? And finally, just another area that's really exciting recently and has a student, Tommy Kelly, involved in it at the moment, is looking at an area of material science that's really a hot topic lately, organic polymers, and how those can maybe revolutionize the solar and electronics materials industry. But a lot of the ways that we improve those materials is too slow with just trial and error synthesis. So a lot of what we've been looking at is how we can improve those molecules through self-assembly with Lewis acid additions, and then even create kind of a predictive understanding of how we can tune these molecules to be exactly what we want them to be for the particular application of interest. We published a paper last year related to that, and now Tommy and Hung Phan in Vietnam are forging into some new areas, even using machine learning to make that even more predictive. So that's an exciting area for us. So all of these kind of come together with our last thing I want to share with you tonight is I'm really passionate about and excited about the fact that LMU signed on to the Green Chemistry Commitment several years ago. It's a way of doing chemistry that starts from the bottom up, thinking about how can we do chemistry right. And a lot of the goals in my group and other research groups here at LMU really keep these 12 principles in mind. LMU was the first private four-year school west of the Mississippi to sign on to this commitment. So, you know, we've got a lot of good partners across the world here. And initially it was in the US, but now it's extending. You can see we've got some South America, Africa even. So that's a really exciting aspect of our department as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, just kind of give you the big general takeaway that our quantum calculations can provide not their own freestanding insights always, but they provide complementary insights to what experimentally can be measured. And bringing those together really is a powerful way of understanding the world around us and applying to these specific problems that we're really interested in. I wanted to thank some of my current students, Crystal Stevens, Dan Bod, and Tommy Kelly, on the work that was presented here. And of course, a number of wonderful alumni, including Grace Johnson, who is up next. Thank you. Thanks to Seaver and McNair and SOAR for some funding of this research, and also our collaborators that were mentioned earlier. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and turn it over to Grace.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Jarvis. I almost called you Emily. I guess that's okay now.
That's okay. Call me Emily.
Okay.
Get out of here though. All right. Sorry, here I moved. There.
All righty. Okay, I'm hoping you all can see the screen that my mouse is on. Can everybody see it?
Looks great.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, cool. So today I'm going to be talking about chemistry, computers, and clean tech. A bit about myself. Dr. Jarvis already introduced me, but I got a Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry, graduated in 2017 from LMU, and now I'm in my 4th year, if you can believe it, of my theoretical chemistry PhD at Stanford. Okay, so I want to start by talking about evolution. And you may kind of wonder, well, her talk is about chemistry and computers. Why is she talking about biology? But I think it's really important because when you think about it, nature has spent, billions of years figuring out the best solutions to life's problems, really. And, these questions of clean tech are really related to some of the problems that life has already figured out how to solve. So I think we can really use nature and use evolution as sort of a database for our queries. So we could ask, climate change is an issue. How are we going to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? And then we can enter that search and see what biology has for us. So there's an enzyme called formate dehydrogenase that occurs in a lot of microorganisms. And basically what this does is it takes a carbon dioxide and it's going to reduce it to formate. And it uses this biological cofactor, NADH. And this is really important because formate can be used as a precursor for fuels that are useful to humans in a way that carbon dioxide cannot. So here's just a quick example of some researchers who took that formate dehydrogenase enzyme, stuck it on an electrode, which basically donated the electrons instead of using a biological cofactor. So the carbon dioxide comes into the active site and then the enzyme releases a formate molecule, sorry. Another question we may ask, and I promise Dr. Jarvis and I didn't coordinate on this, but this just happens to be one of the things I work on in my PhD, is to think about how to harvest light energy from the sun. So nature's figured this out, really quite well. And this happens in photosynthetic protein complexes in plants. So this here is actually the same protein system that Dr. Jarvis was showing. This is the oxygen evolving complex in photosystem 2. And so it's going to take an electron from water and use light energy from the sun to pull that electron off and then go do useful things. The part I want to talk about today are these little blue complexes to the side. And what these things are light harvesting complexes. And they basically act as antennas. So they absorb more photon energy and basically funnel it to the reaction center. The reason I bring these up is because this is one of the systems I study in my PhD. So now I want to move on to sort of broader topics about modeling chemistry, which is really the field I'm studying in my PhD. So models of chemical and biological processes are rooted in the fundamental rules of physics. So we could think about classical mechanics, for instance. We have Newton's equations of motion. What I'm showing here is hopefully it's not super laggy for you guys, is what's called a molecular dynamics simulation of this protein complex. So every atom has a force and you're going to propagate that force in time. We could also think about quantum mechanics, and Dr. Jarvis mentioned a lot of research projects she's been working on related to this. So here we have the Schrödinger equation, which if you haven't seen it yet, you probably will at some point. But quantum mechanics comes into chemistry and biology in lots of different places, but especially whenever you have any sort of interaction with light and matter. And these are really the interesting systems when you think about, solar energy capture. One last thing I want to point out is that modeling quantum mechanics can be very expensive. And what that really means is you're going to need a lot of computing power. So one of the other projects I work on in my thesis is how to scale up quantum chemistry calculations to larger computers. This includes GPUs and supercomputers. So actually it should be within the next few months or so, I'm going to be setting up some simulations and scaling up calculations to Summit, which is the world's largest supercomputer that's currently run by the Department of Energy. Okay, I have very limited time here, so I just kind of want to make a summary here. And this idea that models are here to help scientists not only explain the results of experiments, but also to predict new things. And this is really where a field like theoretical chemistry, as opposed to just experimental chemistry, is really useful. Because if we can predict some phenomena, that means we can actually design something. We can use those predictions to make a forward design. And this is important for these questions in clean tech, because if we can use models to understand the underlying fundamental physics that nature has evolved and learned to do, that means we can emulate it and we can design cleaner and more sustainable technologies. Okay, that's the end of the science part of my talk, but I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the research and coursework that I did at LMU that kind of set me on this journey to my PhD. So I was a biochemistry major. I also had an applied math minor. Here are some of the courses I took for that minor. And I really want to highlight these two courses in particular, linear algebra and my statistics courses, and just say that these have been really, really useful in my PhD because they form the basis of a lot of fields, lots of different fields of physics, especially quantum mechanics, and then, things like machine learning. They're all based, rooted in these courses. And I found them super interesting, and I can't really overstate how great those were. I also took a couple intro computer science courses and a couple physics courses extra, but I really didn't get into the sort of computer science part of my things until I got to Stanford. Another big part of my time at LMU was my research. So I had a biomath project with Dr. Dahlquist in biology and Dr. Fitzpatrick in math, and we were looking at the dynamics of gene regulatory networks and modeling them. And then also, as Dr. Jarvis mentioned, looking at those titanium dioxide nanoparticle surfaces. So really these two projects were really awesome examples of using math and fundamental rules in physics to model really complex systems. And that really kind of set me on my way to thinking about a PhD. I also just want to point out that research is really important, even if you don't think you want to get a PhD. I thought I wanted to go to med school up until, I guess it was near the end of my junior year. And these research experiences that I had, in biomath and chemistry were really, really important. So yeah, with that, I'd like to thank everybody. I don't have a thank you slide, but thanks everyone for listening. And I hope I'm not too much over time. So.
All right, thank you, Grace. I guess I'll be next. So I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. We got 96 people in this Zoom meeting. That's awesome. So I'm Professor Isaac Canyon from Mechanical Engineering. I usually teach, not usually, but I've taught Engineering 100 a couple of times, and unfortunately I'm not doing it this year. I love meeting you guys right when you get to LMU. So I'm looking forward to doing that again, but I'm teaching juniors this year, so and probably next year. So hopefully I'll meet you guys eventually and soon. For those of you who are mechanical engineering majors, those of you who aren't, you're still, once we get back on campus, I'll make sure you stop by and say hi if you're interested in anything I talk about. It doesn't have to be someone from our major. We're always open to everyone. I want to apologize. I'm not, my presentation is not nearly as technical as the previous two. I didn't, dumbed it down a little bit. So I'm just going to talk broadly about what I work on and what I'm interested in and how it applies to clean tech. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Sorry, my Zoom buttons always seem to move. Let's see. All right, are you seeing the slideshow? Yeah, okay. All right, so everyone's seeing just my cover slide? All right, thank you. So the title is obviously just a generic title for this talk, but I want to talk about what I think about when I hear clean tech. And in particular, I want to talk about something that I think is important to keep in mind is that to me, there's really 3 stages of clean technology. And we all want to make the world, self-sufficient and sustainable and perfect tomorrow. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get there. And I think it's really important to focus on what we have now as well. I think Dr. Jarvis was very kind when she talked about fossil fuels, and not all people are that nice when they talk about oil and gas. And a lot of people think it's just antiquated, and why don't we just put wind turbines everywhere and make clean energy? And it's really not that simple. And there's a lot of work that can be done to really optimize these old technologies, to use them as stopgaps until we get to the new places we want to be. And then the second stage is we have stuff that's really ready for prime time, like wind turbines, and those are newer, but they're fairly well established at this point, and we can go ahead and lean on them a little bit as much as possible until those get overcome by something newer and become the old technology, and are just really stopgaps until we can implement the infrastructure. And then the third stage is also very important. It's just is to keep dreaming and think of the new things that could come up and what are the next steps. And when I say dreaming, I don't, there's levels of that too. I mean, there's stages for that. There, we're not just talking about 1,000 years from now or tomorrow. There's everything in between. So let me just show you a couple of things I worked on and how they apply to these three stages. But at LMU we have some good resources. We have a wind tunnel. We have some simulation software for fluid mechanics, which is really my field of fluid mechanics, thermal fluids, heat transfer. So everything I talk about today is going to be related to fluids, to water and air, basically. But we have the capabilities of doing some interesting stuff at LMU. So let me just go ahead and go to my next slide. So when I say old technology, that goes back to windmills and water mills. When people would grind oats with big stones that turn in the river. We still use the same ideas as back then, right? So it's always good to look back at what others have done before you and try to implement them in new ways. There's a lot of wealth of knowledge in what's come before. And really, when we talk about research, that's a real big cornerstone. I know you're all young. Research isn't just inventing new things. It's also going back and reading papers and reading old books and journals and seeing, oh, this person thought of this idea, 200 years ago, and really they didn't know what to do with it. But now we have this new tool, and that's why the work that Grace and Dr. Jarvis do is so cool. As engineers, we have all this new science that we can build off of and implement into the things we do as engineers. Is try to kind of apply some of this new work into more practical appliances. So the first picture I have here is a gas turbine, or you might call it a jet engine, if it's more common term. So if you fly on a plane, you take a commercial flight, your airplane's probably going to have two of these on it, right? One on each wing. And this, the jet engine was patented in 1930. It's been flying since the 40s. It's not a new technology. It's also not very complicated to explain. It really has three stages. There's the compressor, the combustor, and the turbine. That's the basics of how a jet engine works. Really are summed up in those three words. It takes air, it compresses it into a high density. It takes some fuel and it combusts it, and that air warms up and it goes through the turbine. And as that warm air goes through the turbine, the energy that the combustion creates is used to spin the turbine. And the turbine in turn goes back and uses that energy to spin the compressor. And the whole thing cycles through for as long as you need it, as long as you have fuel. It's really that simple, the basics of it. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts, then creating a jet engine that's going to keep you in the air and not drop out of the sky very often and not kill too many people, it's a lot more complicated. And on top of that, you don't want it to be inefficient. You think about all the pollution that comes out of an engine. When you're 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet in the air, that pollution's even more important. It's going straight into the clouds. It's creating a lot more havoc on the atmosphere and the environment. So a lot of work has gone into optimizing these to make them as efficient as possible. And it's still going on. There's still huge conferences every year where thousands of us get together and talk about work that we could do to improve these things. And now combustion turbines, gas turbines, not only are used in airplanes, they're also used on the ground a lot for power generation. So for electricity, making electricity. So when you think of clean tech, you might not think of fossil fuels. You might not think of engines, but really it's a big part of clean technology. Clean energy are these turbines and ground power plants that make use of things like natural gas. So the picture I have here on the left, this is a combined cycle power plant design by GE. So there's a lot going on here, but I just want to point out two things. Here, if you can see my mouse, hopefully, this silver part is connected, is the gas turbine, basically. There's a turbine, there's a jet engine in this factory, and then there's an exhaust, and the exhaust from the engine goes into this huge heat exchanger. And if you don't know what a heat exchanger is, if you're from the East Coast, you know, you all live in an old house, those radiators you have in your room to heat you up in the winter, those are heat exchangers. Your radiator in your car is a heat exchanger, something that takes the energy from one fluid and puts it into another one. So this huge building here is a heat exchanger that takes the exhaust gas from the turbine and uses that to make steam and make electricity. So there's actually two cycles making electricity here. There's a gas turbine, and there's the heat exchanger here. So that's why they call it a combined cycle power plant. And these power plants are over 60% efficient now, which means they're taking 60% of the chemical energy in the natural gas and turning it into electricity. And if you combine this with a place where you can use the excess heat, the exhaust that's still not being used to make electricity, and use that to heat up water for a building, for example, or for heating in the winter, then these plants can become 80% efficient. They're using 80% of the energy in the fuel, which so they're, you know, they're really not wasting much energy. Yeah, we don't have unlimited amounts of fossil fuels, but natural gas is fairly clean burning, and we can get a pretty efficient use of it. And in the meantime, if we're making turbines and we don't have enough, you know, we don't have enough solar cells or wind turbines, these will make a lot of difference. And have I really been talking for 7 minutes? All right, I'll have to speed up a little bit. So the point I want to make on this slide is that this is the gas turbine. So just going back, this is a person. This is the turbine without the cover. So you can see how big these things are. And as far as turbines go, when I did research on this, and I still do a little bit of research on this, my focus was on the combustor section, which is made up of all these blades. And these blades have tiny holes in them where they put cool air through to keep the blades from burning. And my research is all on what happens in one of these holes. And I was one of, you know, last year there were over 6,000 papers on how to optimize these little holes. Just since January, there's been 6,000 papers published on it. So when I say that we're continuing to optimize all technology, I'm not kidding. There's a lot of people still working to get every last % of efficiency out of these. And maybe in 10 years, it'll all be unnecessary. We won't need engines anymore. But we're working on it. And let me speed up and get through this because I know Dre's coming up and I really want to hear her talk, one of my first students at LMU. So wind turbines would be an idea of new technology, but I don't have any work on that. And then dreaming of future technology, a lot of electricity can be made from just the energy in the ocean. And that's one thing we worked on for a while at LMU is we had a capstone project where we had senior students trying to design a power generation system that would work on wave power and how when water goes up and down, it creates pressure differences that could create movement to spin a turbine and create electricity. So that's something that, you know, we want to keep working on at LMU. So if you're interested in clean power and wave energy, that's something we can talk about and how to move this project forward. So I will stop. Sorry for going long. I'm really excited to introduce Dre Helms. They were one of my first research students at LMU, and they did such a great job. It really inspired me to do more with the students. So happy that they got their PhD and now they're here to talk to us and inspire you as well.
Well, I appreciate that intro. I think that's very kind. Okay, let me share my screen. So yeah, my name's Dre Helms. I got my bachelor's from LMU in May of 2015. And then I went to UC Berkeley and got my master's and my PhD, finished that in May of 2019. And since then, I've been a postdoc at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Okay, great. So I wanted to kind of zoom back a little bit and start with a research primer, just kind of 4 simple questions and a couple of answers that I had for those. So the first question, we've all been talking about research, but what is research, right? And research is, just simply put, the process of making new knowledge. And there's kind of a defined cycle to go through this process. There's different steps that researchers take in order to make new knowledge. And I'm gonna go through an example of this in a few slides. And then a few other questions. How can I get started with research? You can ask your professors about projects. If there's a class that you really love, for me, I loved energy systems and fluid mechanics. And then I talked to Emin after class and wanted to get involved in research. And that's honestly how I ended up where I am today. So that's really impactful. Talk to your professors. It's awesome at LMU that we have such intimate relationships with our professors. Why do research? You can do research if you want to specialize and explore something that you really love. So if you have a class that's your favorite, maybe you're really into controls or organic chemistry, which I know nothing about, you can dive further into that. And then where can research take me? So research can take you further into academia. You can go to graduate school. Research can take you to a national lab like Berkeley Lab. And it can also take you into industry where you can work on research and development. So I kind of wanted to start with that second question, how can I get started? Get started at LMU. I had this incredible opportunity to do research as an undergraduate student with Emin, where we looked at chlorine contact in these water reclamation plants. And in this project, we modeled these giant tertiary tanks using SolidWorks and also ANSYS CFD. And we analyzed how long or the chlorine exposure time to the water within these tanks. And we were able to make predictions with our models that very closely matched experiments. And the great thing about this is, and I think that Grace touched on this, when you have a good model, then you can use that model to predict different operating conditions, different designs, without having to test all of those. So we created an awesome model, and Emin actually just recently published a paper on that, so that was cool. And then why do research? So do research to specialize and explore what you're really interested in. So for me, I love fluids, I loved heat transfer. And so I decided to study those in graduate school. And I just got to go to UC Berkeley and honestly just like play. Like these are experiments I set up in my friend's laboratory, Kelvin Helmholtz flow and Bernard convection. It was just super nerdy and also just like beautiful. So this is something that you can do. You can specialize and explore. And my graduate research actually took me into the topic of thermal energy storage, which is connected to heat exchangers. So I'm glad that Emin brought that up. And my particular niche within the heat exchanger study, was replacing one of the two fluids with phase change material. So we would put energy into or take energy out of this heat exchanger. We would essentially charge it up like a battery. So that's what I got to dive into through specializing. And then where can research take me? So for me, it took me to UC Berkeley. It took me to LBL. I got to work with this incredible group of people as a graduate student at UC Berkeley, just like great lab mates. And we all learned from each other and worked together and, spent hours at whiteboards together, just solving problems. So that's what graduate school is about, actually. A lot of whiteboard work. Yeah, I can see some nodding. And yeah, my research at LMU kind of was actually very similar to the research that I did at UC Berkeley, where there's kind of this experimental component where someone else was running experiments, and then I created a model and I validated my model with this experimental data. And again, by creating this valid model, that's something that I could test different designs, or I could scale it up or try out different operating conditions and essentially have this rapid prototyping tool where I can, do all these iterations at minimal cost instead of actually manufacturing each of these different potential designs. So modeling's great. And then, kind of shifting back to that first question, what is research? I wanted to talk about what I'm doing as a postdoc and go through a few of these steps in the research cycle to just kind of get a feel for the process. So for our first step, think and plan. So we're all science and engineering folks here. We know that science is real. We believe in science, which is really nice. And I want to connect this to climate change. I recently read this handbook. It's called Rewiring America. I actually really recommend it. It's free if you feel like downloading it. But the author of this book, this handbook, wrote that climate change is a larger, more insidious version of a similar problem that stems from disregarding science until it becomes an emergency. So climate change and COVID are actually pretty parallel. We have this crisis on our hands, and we're told to take some steps to flatten the curve. So essentially do these things now in order to prevent overwhelming our infrastructure limits. So for COVID, it's wear a mask, socially distance, shelter in place, in order to not, take up all the hospital beds or all the test kits or medical supplies. And we can apply the same kind of thinking to climate change. What can we do now in order to not overwhelm our infrastructure limits? And our major infrastructure limit, let's be very clear, is living on planet Earth. Like once we go beyond an ability to live here, like our species is dead. So anyway, I know that's kind of dire, but it's true. So that's kind of that first step of the research process, thinking and planning, thinking about the problem and trying to plan, come up with potential solutions, because engineers are the ones who are supposed to come up with solutions. And then step 2 in this research process is discovering. So let's look at the solution space. And the solution space, there's a lot of scientific consensus, and I know that there's other options too. I don't want to count out, clean fuels or anything like that. But there is, a big push to electrify and decarbonize. And so certainly we're going to have our stopgap solutions, but moving forward on the supply side, we also need to work on building up a more robust grid. And that does mean increasing solar and increasing wind. And then on the demand side, well, as human beings, we're demanding an Earth that we can live on. And, we need to electrify some of our equipment. So that means driving electric vehicles. That means electrifying heating with this awesome system called a heat pump, which you'll learn about in thermo if you take thermo. But there's sort of a problem that comes with these sets of changes. And that can kind of be highlighted in this graph here at the left. And this is called the duck curve. Duck, like the bird. You've probably seen it, or if you haven't seen it, this is a big thing that folks talk about in California. But essentially what's happened over the past decade is that as we've added more solar to the grid, we've sort of increased the variability in our load profile. So this is time of day. And throughout the day, you can see that through adding all of the solar, we've decreased the demand during these hours when the sun is shining. But then we have all this demand in the evening. As people get home, they turn on their appliances, they're cooking, whatever. So we have all of this demand on the grid. And what needs to happen is our grid has to be responsive to that change in demand. And the way that this is currently met, and I'm going to call this region the neck of the duck, the way that this is currently met is through peaker power plants. So essentially these highly polluting extra power plants are turned on in order to kind of meet this demand. And so you can imagine, as we're adding more renewable energy and as we have more electrified loads, we're actually just going to increase the variability. We're going to make the duck even bigger. And so that's a big problem that we're facing. And so something we can do, and something that's really the focus of my research, is how can we match supply and demand? How can we actually flatten this curve? And the way we can do that is through energy storage and load shifting. So you can see in this discovery process of research, or this discovery phase of research, that I'm kind of narrowing in on solution space. So I want to end with my specific emphasis, which is flattening the building energy curve. So buildings are huge consumers of energy. And we want to think about how we can make them consume less and kind of be part of this interactive grid. And so we can think about kind of traditional solutions that have already been in place, and those are important. We should keep doing those. So one, make the building more energy efficient, put in those LED light bulbs, add solar to your building. And you can see that by adding solar, you create a period of day where you're actually generating more than you're consuming. But then I want to highlight, we've kind of created another duck neck doing that. So the way that we can address that is, well, let's use that electricity that we're generating and let's charge up batteries, whether those batteries are electrochemical or thermal or mechanical, and then discharge those at later times in the day or early in the morning so that we don't have this peaky demand. And you can imagine that if every building on the grid is acting as a load shifter, acting as a battery, then this whole demand on the grid is reduced, flattened, and we can actually transition to this cleaner energy future. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dre. Do our student guides want to take it over, or are we doing questions now?
Yeah, so now this is the Q&A portion. Dr. Jarvis, did you, is there enough time to do the Q&A?
Yeah, definitely. We're good for Q&A, and there's a raffle at the end, right? So we want people to stick around for that.
Mm.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions or they want to talk about, you said there were some others, people picked other on your poll questions. Maybe someone wants to fill in on what their thoughts are. Start a conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Questions, we can get back to that, but especially because we've got the rare opportunity of having Grace and Dre with us now. Any questions for them, I'd say, are paramount because we don't have them Zooming with us too often. But definitely more general questions or getting back to that is great. You can put it in the chat, but you can also unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask.
And I have a question. Can I ask it?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. For Grace, you mentioned that you took some extra classes, or you minored in applied math, and then you took some classes in computer science. Did you have to take summer school for that? Because I know that biochem probably has like a heavy course load.
No, I didn't actually take any. I think I came in with some AP courses that kind of like bumped me up to already knock out like Calc 1 and 2. So then it ended up being like I only had to take 5 or 6 classes for math minors. So I ended up fitting it in.
Dre, I had a question about graduate school. You mentioned like having a very specific like interest that you were studying. Is that necessary, or can you study multiple kind of fields in graduate school, or how does that work?
You can kind of, you can merge multiple different areas, and I probably should have mentioned this since this is focused on interdisciplinarity. But for me, like I brought together, you know, fluids and heat transfer and also math. But there, I mean, there are, the way it was set up at UC Berkeley was that you had a major and 2 minors, and you could really choose those however you wanted to. Certainly your major would have to be like a topic area within whatever department you applied to. So within mechanical engineering, I think there were 8 or so major areas, and it was, I think that was required as part of the application for the PhD. But I don't think that that's required for master's programs. I think that you can just indicate that you want to get a master's in whatever field, and you can take a bunch of classes and kind of figure out how you want to specialize during that process.
Thank you.
I also had a question for Dre.
Go for it.
So it's sort of a two-parter. How much of an impact do you think graphene technology will have on the future of electricity storage? And like you mentioned, buildings that can use batteries, but I know lithium ion isn't very efficient, especially over long term. Like they die within 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And second, how viable do you think wind is as a more permanent solution? Because I do know there's at least some environmental impact with like migratory birds and the such.
Yeah. Okay, so first part, graphene. I don't know enough. Like my specialty has been thermal energy storage. I imagine that it's going to be a very important part of the energy storage mix. And wind generation, I mean, I think with each of these technologies, there's definitely an environmental impact that we have to consider. And there's sort of always this battle between folks, proposing new technology and environmental backlash. And I think we need to find a way to work together and we're not going to do everything perfectly. We're human. But I do think that wind needs to be a part of that mix. And I'm sure that there are folks who are doing research on how to actually reduce the impact on migratory birds. Maybe there's a way to reroute them. I know that sounds naive, but it's possible. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
That's cool. I wanted to jump in. I just read something super recently about making one of the blades of the windmills black or something, and that the color disruption is actually very helpful to birds avoiding it then. I don't know. Some solutions are very complicated and others might be so simple that we almost don't think of them.
Any last minute questions before we move on to the raffle portion?
Yeah, I had a really quick question. I was kind of like focused on the environmental impacts of creating like these new like wind and solar fuel cells and like how that affects the environment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Dre, you want to jump in or? Yeah.
No, I'm least equipped to answer that.
So it's a very important question. One thing you'll probably learn if you're an engineer, if you do energy systems course, one thing we consider when we talk about new technologies is the life cycle analysis. So everything from digging up to the raw materials to recycling what you can at the end. And it's, there's some of these things are just estimates and guesses, and obviously environmental impacts go into that as well. And at the end of the day, whoever writes these reports has to come up with their own priorities of what's important, because you can't just give everything a number. Like polluting water might be more important to some people, and saving birds' lives might be more important to some other people, or just carbon dioxide creation. Everyone has their own scaling. We have some standards, but there's really no way for everyone to pick the right value of how much something impacts. So all this stuff has to go into to your decision, but at the end of the day, it ends up on someone having to decide, well, can we accept these costs? Are they good enough? And so it's a huge question, and it's a huge answer. So I'm not equipped either to answer that, but that's usually the process you go through with new technologies, is you go from mining materials and until the end of it, the whole life cycle of the system. It's actually a big problem right now. Wind turbines is, what are we going to do with all the turbines that are past their life cycle? We have to recycle. You can't. It's like 100 feet of fiberglass. So what are you gonna do with it? You're just gonna put it in a field somewhere. Is that good for the environment? Well, no. Is it better than what the alternative? Maybe. I'm not the person to answer that question.
I think that was great, and I just wanted to say, like, part of the interesting thing about that is that it kind of really makes the case for this interdisciplinarity, like, because people are going to have different things that they focus on as most important. That's kind of one of the big reasons that we need to work together across various science, engineering fields, and even social sciences and policy and whatnot, to really kind of bring all the voices to the table on these issues, because they are big issues, and they do have pros and cons. There's consequences of any decision. But it's great when you have a lot of people that are passionate about their area that can then educate each other on what needs to be done. I was just seeing that there was a question in the chat about if Dre and Grace can share a little bit about how their summer research experiences at LMU have helped them in terms of preparing for grad school.
I can go first. Yeah, I would say it was pretty crucial. Because what you're going to be doing in grad school, I mean, you take some classes, and especially if you do a master's program, you may take more classes, but really what you're doing there is full-time research. So, from the perspective of an admissions person in a grad school, like the best thing is to show that you've, demonstrated your ability to do research. But beyond that, just, the chance to learn in a different way, like I did in my summer undergrad research experiences. So the two projects I talked about in my presentation, those are two separate summers. And then I also worked during the year. But yeah, I would just say that the opportunity to be able to learn in a completely different way, and in a way where you sort of have agency over the questions you get to ask, is really, really valuable. So if you guys get a chance to do it, I would definitely recommend.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think in terms of those questions that you get to ask, like when I took classes, if there was a question posed to me, that was something that I could dig into a textbook and find the answer to. But with research, we didn't know the answer a priori, or someone else didn't have the answer. We were tasked with finding that answer. And so it really teaches you these critical thinking skills of like, well, how can I even get to that answer? What methods do I need to take? And the great thing about working with a professor is these folks have experience in those methods. So Emin could guide me, oh, try going down this path. And then it was just this incredible learning experience. And I guess I also want to add, I'll take another minute. I also did a summer internship in an HVAC company. And I kind of, at the end of LMU.
What is HVAC, Dre?
Oh, sorry, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. The most boring acronym in mechanical engineering. Also my specialty. But I did this internship while I was an undergrad at LMU in this consulting firm. And I was, also working on this research project. And one major difference that I noticed between these two experiences is that at my summer internship, when I asked the question, oh, can we do things differently? Can we do things in this new way? I have this great idea. Like, can we try this? There was pushback, and there was like, the response from the folks above me was, no, this is the way we do things. We're going to continue to do things that way. And in research, working with a faculty mentor, if you ask the question, oh, can we try things in this different way? That's encouraged. That's where you get to, specialize and explore. That becomes your baby, So that's what was so appealing about research to me. And that's why I went to grad school, because I had these two experiences and I knew that I was in this camp that I wanted to be able to do new things and ask those questions and not kind of be contained to doing things the same way.